Imagine you are a German infantry commander on the Eastern Front in the winter of 1942. Your men are pinned down by a Soviet machine gun nest in a fortified building 400 meters away. You call for tank support, and what shows up is not a Tiger, not a Panther, not even a Panzer IV. What shows up is a squat, low, turreted vehicle that looks more like a steel box on tracks than anything you would call a tank. No rotating turret, no impressive silhouette, just a flat armored box with a gun sticking out the front, sitting so low to the ground it barely reaches your shoulder. You are not impressed. Then it fires once. The building disappears. The machine gun nest disappears. Your men advance, and you realize that this ugly little box just saved your entire company. This was the StuG III, the vehicle that German infantrymen loved more than any Tiger or Panther ever built, the vehicle that destroyed more enemy tanks than any other German weapon of the entire war. Not the Tiger, not the Panther, this box. And the story of how a cheap, simple, turretless steel rectangle became the most effective killing machine in the German arsenal is one of the most fascinating stories of the Second World War. The StuG III was born from a very simple observation that a German general named Erich von Manstein made in 1935. Infantry advancing across open ground kept getting stopped by fortified positions, machine gun nests, bunkers, artillery emplacements. The infantry needed direct fire support, a gun that could move with them and shoot at specific targets on demand. Existing artillery was too slow and too far behind the front line to be useful in fast-moving attacks. Tanks could provide this support, but tanks were expensive, complicated, and the army never had enough of them. Manstein proposed something different. Take the chassis of an existing tank, remove the expensive rotating turret, mount a gun directly in the hull, and you have a vehicle that can support infantry at a fraction of the cost of a real tank. The idea was simple, the execution was elegant, and the result was the StuG III. The vehicle was built on the chassis of the Panzer III, the standard German medium tank of the early war period. By using an existing chassis, the engineers saved enormous amounts of time and money. The factories already knew how to build Panzer III components. The supply chain already existed. The mechanics in the field already knew how to maintain the running gear. All the engineers had to do was remove the turret, lower the profile of the hull, and install a gun in a fixed superstructure at the front. The result was a vehicle significantly lower than any conventional tank, harder to spot, harder to hit, and dramatically cheaper to build. Where a Panzer IV cost approximately 103,000 Reichsmarks to produce, the StuG III cost approximately 82,000. That difference, multiplied across thousands of vehicles, meant Germany could field significantly more armored vehicles for the same industrial investment. In a war that was increasingly about production numbers, this mattered enormously. The original gun fitted to the StuG III was a short-barreled 75mm howitzer. This was not an anti-tank weapon. It was not designed to fight other tanks at all. The original StuG III was a pure infantry support vehicle, designed to shoot at bunkers, machine gun nests, and field fortifications with high explosive shells at relatively short range. The short barrel gave the gun a relatively low muzzle velocity, which was fine for lobbing shells at buildings, but completely inadequate for penetrating tank armor. The early StuG crews were not tank hunters, they were mobile artillery. They drove up close to whatever was stopping the infantry and they shot it until it stopped stopping the infantry. Simple, effective, exactly what Manstein had envisioned in 1935. Then the war changed. Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, and everything the German army thought it knew about armored warfare was thrown into question. The Soviets had tanks that German anti-tank guns could not stop. The T-34 appeared on the battlefield and caused something close to panic among German tank crews and anti-tank gunners. The standard German anti-tank weapons simply bounced off its sloped armor.
German tank commanders found themselves in situations where they had nothing capable of dealing with Soviet armor. And then somebody noticed something interesting. The StuG III, with its low profile and its ability to approach unseen, was getting close enough to Soviet tanks to shoot them in the side and rear, where the armor was thinner. The crews were improvising. They were using an infantry support vehicle as a tank destroyer, and it was working. The German army drew the obvious conclusion. In 1942, the StuG III received a completely new gun. The long-barreled 75mm StuG IV was a high-velocity anti-tank weapon that transformed the vehicle overnight from an infantry support platform into one of the most dangerous tank destroyers on the battlefield. The new gun could penetrate the frontal armor of a T-34 at ranges up to 1,000 meters. It could defeat virtually any Soviet tank then in service. And the StuG III still had all the advantages it had always had: low profile, simple construction, cheap to build, easy to maintain. But now it could kill tanks, good tanks, at serious range. The combination was devastating.
What made the StuG III so extraordinarily effective was not any single characteristic, but the combination of everything it was. Its height was only 2 meters, compared to nearly 3 meters for a Panzer IV. This sounds like a small difference until you are trying to spot and shoot at it from a distance. A vehicle 1 meter lower than its opponent can hide behind terrain features, hull defilades, and natural cover that a taller vehicle cannot use. StuG crews became expert at using the ground. They would advance to a ridge, expose only the gun and the very top of the superstructure, fire, and drop back below the crest before the enemy could respond. Against this tactic, even experienced enemy tank crews found the StuG III almost impossible to engage effectively. You could not hit what you could not see, and you could rarely see the StuG III until it had already shot at you. The crew of 4, commander, gunner, loader, and driver, worked in a space that was genuinely cramped. There was no rotating turret, which meant the crew could not simply traverse the gun to engage targets to the side. The entire vehicle had to turn to aim. This was a significant tactical limitation in close-quarters fighting, where threats could appear from multiple directions simultaneously. Experienced StuG crews learned to work around this limitation by constant communication between the commander and driver, turning the vehicle quickly and precisely to engage new targets. But it was never ideal, and in ambush situations where enemy infantry or tanks appeared suddenly at close range from unexpected directions, the fixed gun could be a fatal disadvantage. The production numbers of the StuG III tell a story that is more eloquent than any description of the vehicle's performance. Between 1940 and 1945, Germany produced approximately 10,500 StuG IIIs and the closely related StuG IV. For comparison, Germany produced approximately 8,800 Panzer IVs, approximately 6,000 Panthers, and fewer than 1,400 Tigers of all variants combined. The StuG III was by a significant margin the most produced German armored fighting vehicle of the entire war. At the peak of production in 1944, German factories were completing over 400 StuG IIIs every single month. The vehicle was not just effective, it was the backbone of German armored strength in the middle and late war period, when losses on the Eastern Front were consuming tanks faster than the factories could replace them. The kill record of the StuG III is equally remarkable. German records, which are incomplete and certainly optimistic in places, credit StuG units with destroying over 20,000 enemy tanks during the war. Even applying significant skepticism to this figure, the StuG III almost certainly destroyed more enemy armored vehicles than any other single German weapon system, more than the Tiger, more than the Panther, more than the entire German anti-tank gun arm. The vehicle that had been designed to shoot at buildings ended up being the most prolific tank killer in the German military. Nobody planned this. It happened because the vehicle was good, it was available in large numbers, and the crews who operated it were skilled and experienced. Soviet soldiers who faced the StuG III had considerable respect for it.
They called it the Arztsturm, a Russification of the German word Sturmgeschütz, assault gun. Soviet tank crews learned to fear the low silhouette that appeared briefly on a ridgeline and then disappeared before they could respond. Soviet infantry learned to watch for the squat shape moving through broken ground at the edge of a village. The StuG III appeared on every front where Germany fought. The Eastern Front, from Leningrad to Stalingrad to Kursk to Berlin. North Africa with Rommel's forces. Italy. Normandy. The Ardennes. Wherever German forces needed armored support and could not get tanks, the StuG III was there. German infantry had a relationship with the StuG III that they never quite had with the Tiger or the Panther. The big cats were impressive, they were powerful, they were the weapons the propaganda films showed, but they were rare, they were unreliable, and they had a tendency to be kept back for special operations rather than committed to the grinding daily business of supporting infantry in the line. The StuG III was always there. It was the vehicle that showed up when you called for help.
It was the vehicle that sat at the edge of the village and kept the Soviet armor from rolling over your position. German infantrymen did not write home about the Tiger the way historians write about it today. They wrote about the StuG, the ugly little box that saved their lives on an ordinary Tuesday on the Eastern Front when nobody was making propaganda films. The StuG III outlasted the war itself. After Germany surrendered, captured StuG IIIs continued to serve in the armies of Syria, Finland, Romania, Bulgaria, and several other nations. Finland operated their StuG IIIs until 1966, more than 20 years after the war ended. The vehicle that Erich von Manstein sketched out on paper in 1935, the cheap, simple infantry support gun that was never supposed to fight tanks, was still in active military service in the 1960s. That is the real measure of how good the StuG III was. Not the kill records, not the production numbers. The fact that armies kept using it for 2 decades after the war because nothing they could easily afford worked better. The StuG III is not the tank that appears in movies. It is not the weapon on the propaganda posters. It does not have the menacing silhouette of the Tiger or the elegant lines of the Panther. It is a box, a low, wide, practical, unglamorous box with a gun sticking out the front. But that box, built in larger numbers than any other German armored vehicle, driven by crews who understood exactly what it could and could not do, turned out to be more important to Germany's ability to fight than all the Tigers and Panthers combined. Sometimes the unglamorous answer is the right answer. Sometimes the cheap, practical solution beats the expensive, impressive one. The StuG III proved this more thoroughly than almost any weapon in the history of armored warfare.